Well, hello there, and welcome to this newly updated version of Co-Design Your Family's Tech Use Agreement with me, Jocelyn Brewer. Thanks for being here. Let's dive straight in with my hellos. This is me. This is proof that I was once a teenager. I was a bit of a bratty teenager at times too. I'm a psychologist. I used to be a teacher. I taught social sciences at high school and a school counselor for most of my kind of career in schools. I was actually in the counselor position, and when I trained to get into that role, I did a honours thesis, and that was on boys and games, which kicked off my journey into what has become digital nutrition. So I've been talking about this stuff for about 15 years. As of about 2008, 2009, and I created digital nutrition in 2013 as a positive way to consider our relationship with technology so we can participate and get the best parts out of it, while hopefully avoiding some of those pitfalls. I am a parent of an almost 9-year-old at the time of recording. I was 32 before I got my very first smartphone, so I had a lot of brain development before, I guess, layering technology into my life. And we can consider some of the ways that technology has changed us since we ourselves were our kids' age, which is sometimes a really nice reflection when we're going through this parenting journey to actually think about what was it like to be a kid? And what was it like to be a kid in the age before technology really has colonized so many parts of our life? So a little bit of a map for our course today. You will notice in the YouTube description that you can actually navigate to each video section. So rather than me giving you lots of 6 different videos, just click on the link below, or you'll see as you're watching it, there's little markers to help you be able to work out where to go. So if you want to put me on 1.25 time, you want to skip through, you want to revise and go back over parts, feel free to do it that way. It's all in this one video. We're going to talk about like the technology landscape and how we got here. We're going to look at some change management and digital parenting and some of the principles that underlie what I'm talking about here. And then we'll jump into what I call the Potter process. And it's just a silly acronym. So you can think about Harry Potter and you can think about these 5 steps. The T's are, in fact, one step in terms of having this conversation with your family. We're going to look at some tech taming tactics that you can apply or consider. These are some of the things that often people haven't thought of yet, and that they can make some really significant shifts to what we're trying to achieve. I'll give you some quick communication skill builders because often, our experience of being parented wasn't with some of the collaborative and connective kind of affirming approaches that modern parenting suggests. And then I'll touch upon some of the frequently asked questions that I've had over about the last 3 years from the hundreds of people who have done this course with me. So that's where we're going. You've also got a couple of resources. And again, with this version, I've sort of increased the information. Now, that for some people is really overwhelming. You're like, oh my gosh, it's too much. Other people are like, I want more granular detail. So what I'm giving you this time, you'll see that there's a parent manual. It's super boring looking. I haven't designed it up to be like this beautiful playbook or anything, because ultimately it's a bit of a checklist. It's a bit of a step-by-step manual for those of us who maybe like black and white or like things to just follow along with. But it's got all of the information from the slides. It's got a whole bunch of links, reflection prompts, suggestions. It's like really a massive download of my brain. So take what you need. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. Similarly, the family playbook, which you'll see is a Canva link that you can then download. It's a little bit more pretty. And you can take this and then adapt it. You might want to print it. If you're old school, I've made it so it's printer kind of friendly. It's not going to chew through tons and tons of ink. And there's a lot of structure that you can use. Now, you might pick and choose. You might want to actually be like super consistent with this and say, okay, every Sunday at dinner time, we're going to have one little conversation about one aspect of our technology use. I am not prescribing how to do this. Now, some people want the prescription and say, just tell me step by step. I'm going to give you some broad steps. But what I'm actually going to do is give you some foundations to have conversations that you can pick and choose and make it up, because there's no one right way of doing this, because there's no one single family constellation that I can just cardboard cut out, drop a template on, and off you go. So use these however you would like, but please don't get caught up in needing to do it in a particular way or having to do absolutely all of it. Often the feedback I get is, yeah, either it was not enough, like tell me more, or wait, that was way too much. So find your way in these resources. I'm making some assumptions here. And the first one is that you are an expert in your own family and that all families are unique. The constellation of what makes a family in modern society looks really different to what it did when many of us grew up. Whether you have a blended family, whether you have a rainbow family, whether you are parenting solo, whether you are looking after, you're a carer and you are looking after kids in out-of-home care, or a whole range of different things. Maybe you have several families and several generations in your family. This can be a great guide for grandparents as well. We actually know that the boomers are the people who also need some real direction when it comes to their technology use, particularly their risk of scams. So screen management in families, I want to recognize, disproportionately falls to women. So probably 9 out of 10 people who do my courses are women. And they are taking the lead in actually managing these things. So I just want to acknowledge that to begin with, that sometimes people tell me that they feel like they have an additional child when it comes to managing screens with their partner, because they are either not on the same page or that person has the same kind of difficulties with getting off tech as the kids do. As I've sort of hinted at, not everything I'm going to suggest is going to suit your family. So please take what you need. These are broad suggestions. I don't know you personally. I don't know your values. I don't know your particular kiddos and all of their complexities and quirks. Keep in mind that this is an incredibly complex and often highly charged issue. And my approach is a participatory one. It's not about necessarily prohibition. It's not about a negative, scary approach. If you are looking for additional research and resources, please, go back to the information that I'm providing. But remember, these are complex. And if you're looking for a set and forget or easy approach, this is not it. Okay. There's plenty of checklists that you can download off the internet where you can go tick, 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 and your kid can sign a contract and say, I will never do a bad thing on the internet. And you're done. If that's what you need, go for it. This, far more nuanced, far more of an investment, not just in tech skills, spoiler alert, but actually all communication skills and managing change throughout families. So my aim for you today is for you to get out of conflict patterns over screen time, to more have a more deep understanding of the allure and the multiplicity of screen activities. Screen time is not one thing, it's many millions of different things. And there's many micro interactions happening depending on the content, depending on the context, depending on the cognitions that we're having when we're viewing it. So at times of high crisis or alert or drama, like a bushfire or a significant event, sometimes using screens will be very, very different to a, day in winter when your child is homesick from school. So we need to be quite reflexive with how we approach how complex and how nuanced and multifaceted the way we use screens are. I also want to help you build skills to initiate and manage behavior change and collaborative communication skills, because these are often what we're missing. We don't know where to start with creating change. That horse has bolted often in families around technology use. And trying to walk the horse back into the stable is sometimes really tricky. So I'm going to give you some skills for that. I also just want it not to be laborious. So while there are a lot of resources, as I've said, don't let that freak you out. Actually use it to empower you to use the bits and pieces that you need to make those small changes to begin with. So let's take a moment. Already, I feel like that's a lot of information. So at any time, pause as you need, but let's get your brain ready to learn. We often just dive from, activity to activity, and the idea of having lots of mental loops open and needing to close some of those loops is really, really important. So give yourself a moment to maybe shake off the day, or shake off the week. I'm recording this at the end of 2025, so maybe it's shaken off the year. Give yourself some deep breaths. And our breath really can be the key to so much well-being and spaciousness. So giving yourself those deep breaths rather than taking. And I'd invite you just to notice sometimes our language that we use around some of these things. You can park your to-do list. I promise that your to-do list will not magically get done if you take some time for yourself to do this. So it will be there at the end. You can ditch those distractions. So I don't have my phone in the room with me, and I've turned off, hopefully, all of the notifications that might pop up during this time. And I'd invite you to engage that wonderful technology that sits right here under our skull that really is the key to so many problems in our world. It's not AI. It's not more information. It's often just employing that beautiful brain. And let's take a moment too to set some intentions. And I invite you, as you maybe dip in and out of this work and these videos, to just kind of come back to this each time, that grounding kind of hand on heart, deep breath moment to then maybe project yourself 2 months into the future. Imagine that you've applied these new skills, that the conflict has shifted, maybe not disappeared totally. I can't promise that, but the conflict certainly maybe turns down and you have different skills to manage that conflict. It's shifted away. And I'd invite you just to kind of wander through a day or two in your life with your family in different contexts and just notice what's there, right? If everything was humming along in your family, what would that be like? What would you be doing? What would your kids be doing? How would you be communicating? What would the vibe be? Importantly, how does it feel? How does your nervous system feel? How does your mind feel when this has shifted? So just really notice that and notice that the core desired feeling, as Danielle Laporte would talk about. And again, this is all linked in the resources. How does it feel when you've done this work? How does it feel when you've invested some time and energy, not only into learning this process, but applying it within your family? And I get you to scribble that down somewhere or really notice it and lock it in. And we want to kind of activate that feeling. So we'll just take a moment then to have a look at the digital technology landscape and our modern lives, given that we have a relatively ancient brain and we're trying to play the newest version of Fortnite on our Commodore 64 brain. So the world we grew up in kind of no longer exists. So I grew up thinking that having a rewind button on my Walkman was a really big deal. And you can spend a moment to reflect on your own childhood and the way that technology has crept into all parts of our lives. And then to think about how different our lives and maybe our mental space and how we felt in our minds were before we checked email every day, before we walked around with a smartphone in our pocket, before the pandemic shifted things again from, our immersion in technology, and before AI, ChatGPT, chatbots, and that new wave of technology that's now 3 years old showed up. And you just might clock those different kind of tech lines in your life and how you notice that's changing. And then think about how that's impacting our families, our relationships, our communication, our mental health, our ability to switch off. Okay. That world, as I say, doesn't really exist anymore. We don't have the DeLorean back to 1995. We are here now, and we have some really clear choices about how we deploy or don't technology in our lives. And I broadly say technology just to make that distinction as all digital devices and as screens. So I'm going to kind of flick between talking about technology, screens, devices, but then I'll also talk about platforms. And within the platforms, we'll talk about some of the micro skills or micro habits that we might have with scrolling. Scrolling often happens, either on a tablet or a phone, and usually within the social media space. The world we find ourselves in, though, is one that I think is really hard to disentangle ourselves from technology. And especially, I think, since the pandemic, where we needed to QR code everything in times where we might have left our phone at home, it's now really a third limb. While there are moves underway to reform big tech, and we see that with, I guess, Australia's attempts to ban social media for under 16s, and that really big pushback against tech giants, we can take back control right now. It doesn't have to be as big as, taking on Meta. We can take control back by building better skills and being more informed about how it works. I would love it if parents of under 13s simply did not allow their kids to get social media of any kind, right? Not just the 10 platforms that at the time of recording were in that initial round of age-restricted platforms in Australia. It would be great if parents understood how technology worked a little bit more and used some of the tools available to them, like parental controls within every platform and on each device and through your modem, to be able to control some of the access to technology kids have. We don't need to wait for laws and reform. We can do that like right now. This is one of my most favorite memes when mum said, go and play outside. The kid took his whole gaming console outside to play. Play, whether it's digital or in real life, is play. And this lack of distinction between online and offline is something that many of us adults haven't wrapped our head around, and that we really need to understand in terms of what, how not just immersive, but how important and how embedded young people are, that technology is just part of their life. There's not a room in the house that you step into to use a computer anymore, like many of us growing up. There was a very special computer room and you went in there sometimes. It was not in your pocket most of your, and in your face most of your waking hours. So our current challenge, I think, is not to unplug completely, but to not find ourselves overplugged and overwhelmed. So my work is often about finding the place between digital abstinence and digital addictions, and the finding that doing a bit of a dance, I guess, so that we can be well and be connected. Right? It's not about swearing ourselves off. It's absolutely not about digital detoxing. It's about doing it well. Because where are the lessons, right? We have not been taught the mindset skills to live well and be connected. We have been left to our own devices when it comes to examining the impacts. There are a range of, researchers, an increasing number of researchers who are pointing out some of the impacts. I'm pointing out that these impacts are not just causative. They're actually much more systemic about how our world has changed. This is not just about getting kids off technology. It's about making sure that there's outdoor spaces that are challenging for teens to be in. Where do young teenage boys, young men go that they can be embodied? That doesn't cost a fortune. So I'm not talking about trampoline parks that are, $40 for 2 hours. I'm talking about where do they go to ride their bikes? And then when they do ride their bikes, it's an e-bike and they're, being put at risk because no one's done the education piece there either. So we need to give ourselves some grace, because proactively, learning this stuff is not very sexy. Parenting education, not very sexy, not very like, woohoo, look at me. It's not something that we probably post on our Instagram. the way that we might do other personal or, professional development. So often this stuff has not been championed. It's been a nice to have, not a must have. And we can learn alongside our kids. It's a really great learning opportunity to show them how to problem solve, how to think critically, and how to negotiate. So I'm using this opportunity, I guess, for us to get shoulder to shoulder to learn the things that we haven't been taught. And things that the social media ban will not teach us. They are not going to cover a lot of the skills that this session will. So what are these skills exactly? Well, broadly, it's digital citizenship. And again, this needs a significant rebrand. It's pretty dorky. It's really hard to sell to kids, like, let's be a good digital citizen, right? It's pretty low down the list. How I define this, though, is really in terms of digital capabilities. What are the things that you need to know and understand in order to behave well and be safe? So that kind of safe and savvy participation in online spaces. And I break these down into 4 different areas. Digital well-being, which is where digital nutrition really, its genesis was. Again, 12 something years ago, before like everyone was talking about it and before online safety and digital well-being were really overlapped. It's also about media literacy, so understanding how to read information in online spaces, how to decode that, how to look for facts, how to find misinformation, how to think critically. Online safety in terms of those behaviors that we need to be aware of in terms of predatory behavior, scams, privacy and data issues fit into that. And then technology-based communication, which is all about how we participate and interact really differently through a computer, through a keyboard, through, swiping on our phone. This leads to a whole range of other issues like cyberbullying. So if we're not teaching people the idea that when we're online and we're not looking at one another, we're not present to each other's humanity, we behave in really different ways, we're not going to be able to tackle cyberbullying. And cyberbullying is a really, really big, piece of this that I'm not going to attempt to break down here, because it actually is about human behavior and hierarchies of power. That, until we kind of deal with that in an offline space, then the cyber stuff is just an amplification of that. So they're the skills that generally I teach. I'm not going to walk you through all of these skills, but these are just kind of broad brushstrokes for you to be aware of. And there are lots of other resources and courses and blogs and freebies and things like that I have that you can dive deeper into some of what's involved here. So please meet Digital Nutrition, my tech baby, which is the antidote to digital detoxing. So it really comes as a pushback from the idea that technology is toxic and we need to do some kind of detox. Just like in dieting culture, we don't need to go on detox diets, especially if we're not changing the cognitions that we use when it comes to food and eating. So if you go on a juice cleanse for 3 days and then come straight back into eating poor quality, highly processed foods, nothing's really changed. So it's about creating conscious consumption. And it's a way to think about our digital consumption like a food diet rather than like drugs, which is often sort of, the analogy with drugs is used, which I think is really, really unhelpful, because it basically means we're giving our kids drugs. And we know that that's not the case. We know that there are safe ways to participate in screen use. It's a practical framework, so hopefully you're going to get lots of actual tips to improve well-being and manage your media use. This is not about just the theory, it's about what do we do. The theory, though, is important. Understanding some of this will then predict our ability to understand the impact on our sleep, on our kind of mental fog and that popcorn brain. So we do need to understand some of the basics of this in order to understand why that change is important and in order to sell it to kids. It's an alternative to thinking only in terms of screen time, and instead to think about what you hear me say very many times, content and the context of screen use, as well as the cognitions and the function of what are we even doing looking at this to begin with. So using that adage, if you are what you eat, then how does what you scroll through impact your emotions and your thinking? How does it shape your values and your attitudes? The conversation about radicalization into certain spaces, whether they're the manosphere or whether they're into, radical religious areas, I think is a really important one that we can examine the way that algorithms push information that we maybe were not seeking. What are we eating mentally when we spend hours of each day placing attention on our devices and feeds and we go on those binges? So you'll suddenly maybe start to notice how much the food analogy is actually quite prevalent in our habits. What's the impact of this over time? And, many kids would say they've been in an experiment around this. Again, I've just been had 19 years, my 19-year anniversary with Facebook. So what are we noticing? And even the evolution of that platform, we know has changed dramatically. Where there is a massive move that people are not posting as much, they're not spending as much time online. So we've reached peak social media. Can we recognize what I call the virtual vitamins? What is the really great stuff online? What are the ways that we connect and we get educated and informed versus the, ultra processed or genetically modified AI developed slop and content that is absolutely flooding our feeds, which is part of why we're turning off. So you can have a think about all of the food analogies you want to use here for technology use. If we're to get beyond screen time, though, and think more deeply, these are the things that we suggest. Screen is time itself is an important measure because we only have 24 hours in the day. So if we're consuming information and content, even if it's low quality information, for more time, then we kind of must be doing something less. So it displaces other activities. Sure, you might be going on your walk and listening to a really values aligned podcast. I would call that digitally nutritious and a good example of multitasking. But often what we see is screen time is displacing sleep and movement. What we need to do instead of just thinking in terms of screen time and counting digital calories in the form of screen time, we also want to look at the content of what is it that we're actually looking at? Who are we following? What information are they providing? Is that correct? Is it helpful? Is it misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation? Really different kind of aspects of content. Is it that virtual vitamins? Is it AI slop and processed food that's kind of brain rot material? It's also about the context. So where are we doing it and why are we doing it? A kid at a birthday party on a screen, we would be maybe really questioning. We hopefully would really question a kid at a birthday party reading a book. And you might start to notice how we judge screen activities much more harshly than we would a kid reading a book. We might not stop and ask what the kid's reading. If they were reading 40 Shades of Grey, however many shades of grey there are, 50, or the Anarchist Cookbook, and they're 9, again, that goes back to that content question, but the context in which they're doing it. So, in the middle of winter, if you're sick, using screens probably going to go up a little bit versus, even in the middle of summer, quite frankly, really hot days in Australia, we're not outside. It's actually a risk of heat stroke to do that. So you can think about that context, that bigger picture. There's also the cognitions. What are we thinking when we're online? Are we thinking, this sounds like absolute bollocks and I should go and fact check it? Or are we thinking, I am not pretty enough. I really need to lose 10 kilos and having all sorts of body image issues because of the content we're consuming? So it's really important, something we don't talk a lot about, to think about, like, what are we thinking? What are those cognitions? What are we telling ourselves and how is that shaping us? And then finally, the function. There's lots of reasons that we're on technology as parents, carers, as adults. It's not all Candy Crush and scrolling Instagram. There's a lot of email. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of data entry. There's a lot of Slack and WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram and, 28 different places that we are communicating. So we can think about, is this for learning? Is this for leisure? Is it for creativity? Is it passive? And we can start to really build out that digital diet and appraise what we're doing. Because as I say, screen use is not one thing, it's a million different things. And in fact, we start talking about our screenome, like our genome. What is our particular way of using screens? So not just screen time, but screenome. Just like toddlers have a different diet to teens, or teens might eat really differently to athletes, each of us have different ways of consuming technology, of engaging with different platforms and with different people. So considering our individual needs, interests, and ages, this is going to help us actually craft a plan that's suitable, appropriate, aligned, and likely to work. So you can read about the digital nutrition philosophy for more. It's all connected in those resources. And we'll take you through, some processes around designing that digital diet and identifying virtual vitamins. So what are some elements of a digital diet? Well, it's a planning to unplug, okay? Making sure that you have some dedicated time offline to control the portions that you consume. So short bursts, not those big long marathons. Using lots of different techniques to actually schedule sessions. And I'll talk a little bit about how I do that myself when my phone has a digital sunset. I use a particular app. So from like all the fun stuff on my phone, including my bank accounts, shuts down from 9:30 p.m. until 8:30 the next morning. So I simply don't get distracted or tempted to go on those little binges. To game seriously and to reappraise some of the games that your kids might be playing and making sure you have a better understanding of what's contained in that, whether it's appropriate, whether the kinds of things that they're doing in those games are values aligned, and whether or not you need to go and do your own due diligence to actually investigate that content of their digital diet and then to reshape it. So again, considering those virtual vitamins and looking inside the content that you're consuming. There's this interesting concept in self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is one of the strongest, most rigorous theories of human motivation that has ever existed. It outlines 3 core psychological needs, which are met really, really well in online spaces. It probably is why we have some addiction or dependence, these, sort of naughty habits, guilty pleasures with technology, because they meet our need for competence, connection, and control. So this need for mastery, we feel really good when we're good at something, right? If we suck at something, it can be really hard to stick to it. Kids are really good at using technology. We call them digital natives. They're not digital natives, they're actually digital orphans because they grew up without a generation above them guiding them through, but they're really good at using it. They're not scared to have a go and work out what particular buttons do, whereas we are a lot more careful. Connection, that relatedness, being a part of a community, finding your tribe, finding your niche, finding that other person who geographically might be really, really far away, but from a values and an interest perspective is super aligned. So we can find those people. And then control or autonomy, that ability, especially for the kind of 13 to 16-year-olds. And your agreement in the way you approach this is going to be really different if you have, broadly speaking, a primary schooler versus a high schooler. But the drive for autonomy is really strong in many kids. And in schools, they often don't get it. They don't get the choice over which maths tests or maths activity they do. We really give kids limited autonomy and control. And they learning to have it and exercise it is something that's really important for their independence. So what I suggest here is that we kind of tap into and understand how this is playing out for our kids. And again, I've got a whole course, I guess, a little explainer on how this plays out in terms of our needs in online spaces. So if we remove social media or we take something away, we want to try and replace it with something that meets these in a similar way. So for many of you who are like, part of my agreement, I already know what I want to take away. I want to take screens before school away. That's often a really good place to start. We need to provide something else that is going to have a snowflake's chance in hell of meeting the need for competence, connection, and control. And we have this in mind when we're crafting new activities for kids to replace things with. Because for many of us, if we want to reduce the time that we're spending online, we're going to have to get creative and replace it with something else. We have to have that supplemental activity. We can't just say, go be bored. And I'll talk about that as we go. So how and why to co-design, not just design or implement or, uh, put into place, in a kind of dogmatic way, to co-design a tech use agreement. And you'll notice the language here, while kind of boring, I've tried really hard to come up with a better name for this, but tech use agreement tells you what it's going to do. You're going to make an agreement around how you use technology, but you're going to co-design it. And, you're here because you know how important it is, but the how is what we're going to explore. So getting that digital genie back in the bottle or the horse back in the stable, it is absolutely possible. And I'm going to get you out of the conflict and the confusion over how to do that with some really clear steps. But I need to say, we need to prepare and do the groundwork. We need to really reflect on how we got here, and that some of you will be really quick at doing this and really, get it quickly. And find that easy. Other people will be quite challenged by some of this, depending on how much of this kind of like reflective work that you might have done. And for many of us, like learning how to parent was, no one really talks about that. No one talks about how much time it actually takes to learn the skills around this particular relationship. My really big suggestion here is don't attempt reactionary rules. So many people come to my work at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night when they're about to throw an iPad off the Harbour Bridge because they're, hit a crisis or hit a place where they're going to be really reactive. And we don't actually want to say, I'm going to throw the iPad off the Harbour Bridge, because empty threats in parenting are really tricky, because if you've made an empty threat, you're not going to be taken seriously. And we have to get really clear on some of the consequences and doing what we say. So don't attempt reactionary rules. If you say you're going to throw the iPad off the Harbour Bridge, I will tell you where to park at Observatory Hill so you can do that. But we want to try and get out of reaction and into responding. And that's going to take some time. There's not a quick fix, because for many of the families who come to my work and get to this point, the problem took years to emerge. I'm working with people who are about to hit 30, lots of people who are hitting 30, who were given smartphones, who were given access to social media when they were in year 2. And so they literally have already had maybe 20 years on social media, but they're 20 years younger than I am when I started using it. So this problem often has taken years to emerge. So the solution is going to take some time. It's not an overnight thing. There's no formula for how long the solution will take. It really depends on your resolve to, hold the boundaries firm and review things. So the journey is often the destination. I'm actually not so interested in the rules that you put into place, but the conversations and the learning opportunities that you have through the process. Because as I've said, no two kids and families are the same. So while there's some general principles, they're all going to need tailoring. We're all going to need different approaches. And if your child has additional needs, is neurodivergent, and that can look like many different things. I've been asked a lot of times to do a course specific for neurodivergent kids. And the problem with trying to do that is there's probably 18 courses on screens and neurodivergence, because of the different profiles and the different ways that neurodivergence shows up, depending on whether or not there are environments that help regulate that kid's nervous system. So their neurodivergence is accommodated rather than masked or assimilated out. So some of what I'm going to suggest may need clear adaptation if you do have kids with different learning needs and really specific neurodivergent profiles. So you need to think a little bit carefully about how you adapt it. but also that technology for some autistic kids in particular is their lifeline, is something that they use adaptively to self-regulate. It doesn't always, this is why I have a participatory approach. It's not about always saying absolutely not. It's about saying how and where is this appropriate and where does it fit in, and holding those boundaries. We can think about a bowling lane when it comes to setting some boundaries. And boundaries can be, again, a really emotional and fraught thing. And deserves a lot more work sometimes than I'm going to be able to give it in this session. But boundaries help manage expectations and they guide and scaffold behavior. So what we want to think about in terms of the bowling lane is, where are your bumpers set? Yeah. Are your bumpers set super wide where kids can literally smash a ball down and there's, no correction? Or are your boundaries really, really narrow? And sometimes families come to me because they want stricter rules. And through doing this work, they realize that the narrow expectations they're setting are actually unrealistic and not sustainable. So what my suggestion is that we find where is that right kind of boundary for your kids at this particular point in time. And those boundaries sometimes will need to narrow and sometimes need to widen, depending on your kid, depending on maybe the risks they take or the choices they make in online spaces. Generally, though, the best part of this analogy is we are recognizing effort and endeavor to try and be on target and be within the bumpers, rather than always being on point and getting a strike, because we know consistency is really hard, right? They do a really good job one day of coming off when time is up on the iPad, and then the next day they're having a massive meltdown about it. So we want to recognize the effort and the behavior and the endeavor, not the outcome. Okay, so the outcome is probably not that you're going to have perfect tech harmony and everyone always turns things off at the right time. It's that you can see that they're making that attempt and they're building their skills to do that. So you can have a think. Where's your digital bowling lane? Is it too wide or too narrow? Does it need some reinforcement? So family tech use agreements. Surprise, surprise. Many kids say, gosh, I wish I had more rules around tech. It would be really easier and would be in less conflict if we had clear rules and they were consistently applied. And we'll talk about consistency because that's a really tricky one. So often, if you notice, kids who game, they love rules. They love their games because the rules are really clear and the rewards are really clear. If you do this thing, you get this many points. Yeah. So there's some real clarity with how to behave so that they can work out, well, if this is the reward or this is the consequence, what am I choosing? So part of what we want to do is set that out for kids so that they know what, when, where, and why their technology use is allowed or disallowed. Okay. How to behave and how to use technology that fits within those bumpers and fits within what we agree. Often these rules are grounded in being safe, respectful, and building a sense of belonging or connection, not escape. Okay. So where we're seeing kids escape into technology and use it to cope maladaptively, that's where the problems with tech use arise. So it's actually often that we see kids who develop gaming addictions, it's because of that need to escape and using it as a self-soother rather than building that sense of belonging, okay? Connection. So we're talking about safety, both physically and psychologically. So you might, and one of the interesting things here is parents see technology as being physically more safe than being on an e-bike in the street, okay? It absolutely is. It's not psychologically more safe if some of the people that you're speaking to are trolling you, are predators, or you're exposed to a really heinous material. Okay, so we want to think about both those physical and psychological safety. The physical safety is literally some of the postural and eye strain issues that we're seeing. The physical safety is often the impacts on your brain's wiring, which then buddies into the psychological aspect. Respectful in words and deeds. And this, again, will have different kind of, your bowling lane with respect will be wider or thinner depending on your value system, and in terms of what is acceptable kinds of chitter chatter and interaction. But you can think about how you might consider respect and define respect in your family. And yeah, that sense of belonging, we really want to make sure that kids stay connected. Withdrawing from family and friends is a key sign of mental health issues. Not always, but often is one of the first key indicators that something's going on for a young person. So we want our agreements to be grounded in these three things. And how my work differs, as I say, is that we're really looking at choosing a compact. A compact or a pact is a mutual agreement created freely between parties around a common issue. It's really different to a contract, which is a predetermined set of specific rules that's implemented without much flexibility. So you might have in your head a really clear contract you want your kids to agree to. That's okay, right? You get veto power, like absolutely have the contract, have the idea, but set it up as a compact, as a pact. You're going to give kids the opportunity to write the first draft of this agreement so they have that really important thing called autonomy, right? That sense of control, that they were asked, they were included. It's a mutual agreement created freely. Okay, maybe not freely in the terms of they're not like, hey, mum and dad, can I please have a tech use agreement, right? They're not going to bring that to you, but when you bring that to them in the right context, they're going to kind of buy into it a lot differently to, signing a predetermined contract where they have no say. They're not going to have that buy-in. They're not going to follow it. It's often not worth the piece of paper that it's written on or e-signed on if it's an e-document, which again, shows you how embedded stuff is. I really like the book, and it's probably up there somewhere, Taking People With You by David Novak. Really what we're trying to do is take people from just pure compliance into collaboration. And again, this is really different to how many of us would have grown up, where we just did what we were told. We didn't question things, and we certainly didn't tell our parents that they were hypocritical if they were using their phone at particular times when we weren't allowed. So what this book does, I think, is useful to create change in families. Again, it might be around a range of different behaviors. Getting kids to take showers is sometimes really hard in the teenage years. We want to create this shared vision for how things could be better or different. Okay, so talking about things like, hey, I notice we're in conflict so much. I notice that we're not talking anymore, that we're all heads down on our own laptops or own devices, right? What would it be like if things were better? We want to be collaborators. So again, this kind of buys into that sense of autonomy or control, that we give young people a voice to co-design the vision and the plan. And again, I would encourage you here, if you really don't plan on listening to your kids, press pause now and ask me for a refund. There's no point in entering into this if you want a top-down approach to telling kids what you're going to do. Even if you have a sense of what you want that to look like, your approach to getting their buy-in is about collaborative, shoulder to shoulder. We're in this together. Let's learn about it. And being vulnerable to say, no one's taught me this, right? I know I didn't think about how technology was going to play out in my parenting life when, 15 years ago or whatever it might be. So I would really encourage you to think about how we can listen more deeply to young people. So talking less and listening more is sometimes at the first key to shifting that parenting relationship. And again, you might have a beautiful, brilliant, really connected relationship, or you might be, really in a place of despair. And again, often when people work with me, they're really despairing for the 7-year-old that has and the relationship that you had that's turned into a really tricky time where it feels like there's a stranger in your home. We also want to celebrate progress and keep revising and improving. You are not going to get this right the first time. In fact, I don't want you to get it right the first time, because I want you to demonstrate how to problem solve, how to build consistency, how to revise, reflect, up level, and keep working at things. That builds resilience. That's that bounce forward, keep going, right? Even in the face of failure, even in the face of it not being perfect. Okay. So we want to allow our teens to actually be our teachers and for us to be vulnerable to have a shared learning experience where we can literally model to them how to problem solve. It's not, again, from a parenting perspective, it's not about protecting our kids from anything happening. It's giving them the skills to manage the situation when the proverbial hits the fan, because it probably will at some point. So what's the anatomy of a great agreement? Or it needs to be clear and specific. So it's a little bit like having SMART goals. Clear, specific, but some room for respectful negotiation and contingencies. So what if I break my leg and I can't do all my sports and I need to rest? What am I allowed to do? That might be room for respectful negotiation and contingency. But generally, in a normal week of our life, what does it look like? It's tailored to different people in the family, to their ages and their digital preferences, as well as having a whole family system. So you'll see as we go through the workbook that there's some examples of an umbrella, that these are the umbrella rules for our family. And again, I say rule accidentally. I don't mean rule like hard and fast, but this is the agreement. These are one of the principles, is our whole family has an agreement that the Wi-Fi goes off at 10 p.m. every night, whatever it might be. Okay. It might not be the Wi-Fi. It might be that everyone docks their phone in a particular place and charges it overnight. Yeah. You choose your thing. But there's something for everyone so that you all have buy-in to that, but then you have your own little agreement. It's also framed positively as target behaviors, not as long lists of misdemeanors. Okay. Again, contracts are usually, I will not do this. I will not do that. I must not. I will not. No one is inspired by that. No one remembers that until they do that thing and then they trot it out and say, you signed here to say you wouldn't do it. And they're like, oh, I forgot. So we want to frame it as like the behaviors that are aligned. Like I am critical before, I think critically before sharing information. Not, I will not share information if I think it's dodgy. Right? So we really want to think about the language that we're using and we're framing it as the target, not the will nots. They're also applied consistently and fairly, including to you as parents. Now, this is the really hard bit, and we'll talk about that. They're regularly reviewed and revised because that's going to help you with consistency. You're not going to get consistent if you set it and forget it. It's linked to behavior. It links behavior to meaningful rewards in the short, medium, and long term, not just more screen time. So you want to be really careful of saying if you do all of these things in your life really well, you are going to get more time, online. Tech as a currency can be a little bit tricky. You're going to have to think that through. It's also an extrinsic motivator. So it's something that like being paid to do your homework or being incentivized with money, incentivizing externally rather than when you do some things, you just feel good. It makes your mother smile. It makes the world a nicer place. You don't have to be rewarded for everything that you do. So just keep an eye on how you're going to set up some of those meaningful rewards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And his has clear consequences. So when we breach a rule or an agreement, what happens? There needs to be some level of consequence, and we'll talk about that. It gets quite tricky depending on the age of your child. So as they get older, you have less levers to pull. And again, taking away screen time sometimes punishes us. You don't want to take away screen time if you're actually leaning on it a little bit as a vacation care provider, for example. So we want to think about like, how do we set those consequences up? Sometimes if you've got a teen who might be 16, 17, earning their own money, have bought their own phone, have paid for their own devices, they're like, well, you can't take that off me. So we have to think a little bit through how that might work. And they have, like, I would get kids to set up the consequences. It's really interesting when they do that. They often set far stricter consequences than we would ever come up with. They're like, I should be banned from whatever for a week. And we're like, oh, I thought maybe like an hour would do. So ask them what they think is appropriate first, rather than you needing to, go guns blazing with that. So a note on consequences. This will be a personal thing because there's a bit of a pushback around carrot and stick rewards and punishments and how we set that up, literally based on that self-determination theory that I was talking about. That theory of motivation is all about intrinsic motivation, which is the best form of motivation. I do it because I'm compelled by my values to do it, not because somebody's going to pay me a shit ton of money to do it, right? So depending on your parenting philosophy, depending on your familiarity with some of these things, um, without a consequence, it can be tricky to shape a behavior. It's hard to get kids to feel good feelings just from making their bed or whatever, you might be trying to use. And life and society is actually full of consequences that we need to prepare kids for. So if I drive my car over the speed limit, a certain number of kilometers over the speed limit, when the cop pulls me over, they don't go, oh, well, Jocelyn, you've been a really good driver and, you're financially doing it tough, so I'm only going to fine you this amount. It is set in stone that you get a particular fine. You touch your phone in New South Wales while driving, it's like a $457 fee. Fine, right? It's not like, oh, I'll make it up on the spot. It's set, it's clear, it's communicated. I could go and read all of that. In fact, your school might send you home the list of like how much it costs you if you drop your kid off in the no stopping bay. Okay. And you can think, is it worth my X number of dollars for that convenience? So we do kind of need to prepare kids for some of these consequences. The trick is to have something to apply when that action or discretion requires it. So again, no empty threats, no reactionary, like you're never getting that, or I'm sending that back to the shop or whatever, right? And look, we all do that. And kids can tell when you're joking, like, and you're like, oh, I'll throw that off the Harbour Bridge versus no, like I'm taking YouTube Kids off the TV. You have to actually know how to do that, right? Like that's what stops many people. They say, I said I'd take it off the TV, but I don't know how to uninstall it. Okay, again, we need to think through that. When we set consequences, the practice framework is one to keep in mind. And again, this is in the resource, so you don't have to worry too much about it. It's practical, so it needs to be easy for you to implement, right? As I just said, like you need to be able to actually take YouTube off the TV if that's the consequence. It needs to be related to the behavior. And sometimes that's a natural consequence, right? So if you got really angry about me telling you that it was gaming time up and you threw the Game Boy or the Switch up against a brick wall and it smashed, the natural consequence is you smashed your console. Okay. It's related to the behavior. So we really want to make sure that we're not sort of punishing. We don't want to say like, you're not going to basketball, right? We actually want to probably say, you have to play more basketball. So it needs to be related to the action. It needs to be agreed on in advance so they know the consequence, what the consequence is for X behavior. That's what I just said about the cops and like all the fines. It's laid out. So you might kind of come up with, okay, if we breach these things, this is what the consequence would be. All right. It's collaborative, which is all about this whole session. It builds autonomy. You talk about it together. You ask them first. You listen to them. It's time limited. It has to an end point and is clear. So back in the day when we got told we were grounded, our first question was for how long? And it couldn't be like forever. So we want to talk about like, okay, what's that end point, and which is related to equal to the action. So we don't want to make it too over the top. It's infrequent, so it's not often or overused, and it's consistent, applied evenly and fairly. So that's the practice framework for setting consequences. Keep in mind those natural consequences. Sometimes you don't need to put a consequence in place because the natural consequence is enough. I had a situation with somebody who changed their Roblox date of birth to be 21. And then Roblox changed the rules around changing your age in light of the age restrictions, and they can't then change it back. So they've kind of lost their Roblox account. Now, if they had have asked a parent before doing that, that might have been a different outcome. The natural consequence, the parent didn't really need to do anything apart from write to Roblox and see if they could get it reversed. The natural consequence was, no, you can't access that account anymore. Okay. So you might think about where that fits. My notes on consistency. If consistency was easy, my job would not exist. I wouldn't need to work with people about what got in the way, what was the barrier to change, why aren't we just all exercising 5 days a week, drinking green smoothies, waking up at sunrise, all those things, right? We're not robots. Our weeks are not uniform, okay? We go from, week to week, and while we might have a framework for that, things happen, life changes. This is why I don't like the notion of balance, right? The notion of balance is everything stays as is. When things change, or if we need to move forward or be respond to things, we're off kilter. So I talk about blend instead. How do we put in those right combinations? So this is why to get consistent, we really need to start slow and keep building, holding steady on the basics and giving yourself grace to reset and try again. And by now, I hope you're hearing me say enough times how important it is for us just to do little by little and plan and think carefully about this. Okay, are you ready? The 5-step Potter process. So imagine those 2 T's are 1 T because it's not actually 6 steps, there's 6 letters, the 5-step process. And here he is, Mr. Potter himself. So the steps are for parents, carers, to plan and prep. Then to organize to meet, super easy. Then to have the talk, and it's not a talk like you're talking at them, it's a conversation. And then to tame any tantrums. So that's a process of dealing with, any teenage tiger tantrums that might come up. Oh, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. That's not fair. All that stuff. How do you manage that? Establishing a new plan, so coming up with the actual agreement, and then revise progress regularly. So think about Potter. The first step is to really dedicate some time to considering what you actually want to achieve and the goals of the meeting and the agreement. Plan for how you're going to facilitate the next steps and get kids buy-in to engage in the conversation. And have a close look at the manual and the playbook to help you prepare. There's lots of reflection prompts and different things that you can go through in order to kind of get really clear on what you're trying to bite off and making sure you're not biting off too much too soon. What are the values that underpin what you're trying to achieve? What's the stuff that matters to you? So clarifying these values is super important. You might have done it a million times. You might have never done it. And there's lots of resources out there on it, right? Quick Google and you'll find lots of prompts around it. How do you demonstrate commitment to your values, and are you walking the talk? So this is what we talk about in acceptance and commitment therapy about being aligned to your values. When you live a life aligned to your values, you generally tend to have less psychological distress, okay? So when things are outside of your values and when you're asked to act in ways that don't align, that's where things get really tricky. So clarifying those, first step. Then maybe we need to take a reality check. This is kind of like to do with the bowling lane. Are you being too narrow? Are you being too laissez-faire? Are you realistic around your expectation of your kid's ability, for instance, to self-regulate or self-motivate or self-resource? So lots of people tell me that they want their kids to have more self-discipline, to have more self-control, right? Now, we only get self-control through being shown self-control, right? We only self-regulate if we have been shown co-regulation, which, we'll touch upon in terms of how regulated are you feeling, how much gas do you have in your tank for holding space to demonstrate some of these things to your kids, because they need that role modeling. It's not a button, right? Like self-regulation is not a button that gets flicked when they're 16 or any particular age. Self-motivation, you'll notice if you have, a couple of different kids, how different their motivation or getting their goals are, or ability to even have or set a goal. How can you support them to get those in place, right? What planning and support do you need to put it in place? So what are those expectations? Do you actually need to do some work on your own ability to regulate and hold space for this before you kick off. So again, slow and steady is sustainable. I would prefer you do that 1% change each week than try and 160 your life and any habit and find it all falls over. We also need to clarify the problem. So those problems will usually fall under the areas that I talked about an agreement should speak to, which is lack of respect, safety, so not being safe, including for well-being, not just physical safety, and not belonging, so not participating or withdrawing. Okay, so many people say, oh, they're just so rude, like I've been abused, you know, not doing things that they used to do. So that usually is where these things show up. Then we want to think about, what are the conflict flashpoints? Is it at bedtime? Is it about being distracted? Is it about the content they're consuming and then the sorts of things they start saying or sprouting or parroting that you can see is like not values aligned? And then we want to map the points of friction. So is it ending time online? Is it going to bed? Is it listening? Is it participating? Thinking about, like, you know, where's the problem? Where's the conflict show up? And then what are the friction points? Because we want to take those points of friction away. We want to make it easier to kind of comply with the agreement. We can present the problem using CPRS or CPRs if you have CPR in your brain. So the content of what's happening, the pattern of how often it's happening, the relationship, which is the impact of the problem, and then the solution, how we want to solve it. So an example of this might be saying, hey, we'd like to have a chat about what we've noticed to do with your mood after you've played games for a while. That's the content. The grumpy reactions and almost borderline abuse and aggression are happening more often. That's the pattern. It's becoming quite distressing for us and others around you, which is the relationship. We want to find a solution that's win-win for this. That's your sort of solution. Okay, so it can be simple as that. Notice that I'm not saying, we've noticed that you're a raging horror after playing video games. Therefore, the video games are going in the bin and you are not to play them because you're making your little sister freak out, right? There will be no discussion entered into. That might be how we used to do it, right? Now we're like, hey, we need to have a chat because this behavior is having this pattern with this reaction and we need a solution, okay? So it's a lot less there'll be a lot less defensiveness, I'm guessing, if you present it that way. We want to then create a plan for the talk. So like, when is the best time, right? You're not going to kind of have a doorstop conversation on the way out to school, you know, in the morning. You don't want to spring it on people. How long do you think you need? How can you entice them to actually have a conversation and set the expectation around participating? How can you communicate this so they don't freak out or resist? All right. I want you to think about this like when your boss wants to have a meeting. If they say, hey, on Friday, can we have a chat about planning the Christmas party? That's really different to getting like a calendar invite saying, you know, Monday morning discussion and, you know, having no context. So if you give them the context, again, like we've just explored, hey, we want to have a chat just about our our technology use, so that we can be in a better place with that and have less fights. Great. When is going to be a good time for that? I often say that Sunday afternoons can be good. Food is good. Low stakes, low conversation. You might want to have a few little chats. So talk often, talk early. You don't want to make it a 4-hour like talk fest. You want to kind of think about what works in your routine. So then that organizing to meet, right? This is the easiest part of the whole thing. You're just going to signal that you want to meet and discuss the technology use. You set that time. Make sure it's not like too early or too late. You don't want like Saturday morning and you know, teenagers are like groggy and they've been up gaming till 3 or whatever. Food, clear agenda. So allay their fears. It's a collaborative conversation, not a ban. Nothing drastic is going to happen. Easy peasy. Now, in your workbook, there's a little invitation. You could be super dorky, depends on your family, depends on the vibe. It might be enough, like you might use Google Calendar and put it in and say, you know, tell me what pizza you want to order from our favorite local shop, whatever. Be creative. Then we're going to step into the talk, right? The actual meat of this is the meatiest part. This is a part that you really want to plan for, and kind of have in your mind like the sorts of things that you want to get done. About 30 minutes, maybe. You just maybe want to take breaks. You might want to do it over different chunks of time. Really, you do you, right? Doesn't matter. Use parts of the workbook. Might want to have pens, texters, other paper. Depends. Again, you might have iPads that you can all do a collaborative doc on. Who knows? Take what you need. The whole thing is not going to be for you. Adapt it to the ages of your kids. And remember, it's a conversation, not a lecture. You might find that kids really rally against this, especially once you get into the conversation. We want to recognize that change is hard, and meetings like this can seem like a bit of a threat to them if they don't have a sense of control or ownership. That's why we're giving some of that control back over. We need young people to feel that they have a voice and that voice is valid and listened to. So young people might kind of tantrum to show their discomfort around change. And this is just a signal. I always say to parents, this is a signal we need to listen harder to them. Okay. The internal emotional experience of a teenager having, inverted commas, a tantrum is exactly the same as a toddler. They have just learnt different socially acceptable ways of demonstrating that. So while a toddler might have no qualms in, rolling around on their back in the middle of the supermarket, a teenager's not going to do that, but they're going to stomp their foot or tell you maybe to fuck off or whatever, right? Like, again, different kids, different levels of behavior, different things at stake if they feel like too much is going to change too quickly. All right. And again, that's another reason why we don't go too fast. And this slide has stuffed up, but there's some examples here of like what it looks like in your workbook. So, little pages like this, how technology impacts us positively and negatively. So we're really recognizing the role that it plays in friendships, values, schoolwork, motivation, well-being, in other ways. So you can work through all of those things. The idea here was just to give you some examples. Positively, it helps me connect with my friends. Negatively, I sometimes feel left out of group chats. Values, I really like following, if kids want to be a vet or they're into animals, I really like following the zoo and all of the different animal content. Negatively, sometimes I see really awful content around animals being hurt. Okay, so you can think through how that might show up. Again, other examples here of how shaping our tech use positively. So how can we use it and put guardrails in place to protect sleep, connect with one another, being well, keeping safe, reaching our goals. So while we don't have to do goal setting, if we know that, we have a 12-year-old and they are really, really excited about making the regional netball team, we want to keep reminding them of that goal so that we build the self-control around, well, you kind of can't have, if you're spending more time online and you're not working towards that and you're not, practicing shooting hoops or whatever in order to get there, we're missing an opportunity. Okay, so you can build in that goal orientation to help build self-control. We can talk about screen time that, again, 24 hours in the day, we need to be sleeping 8 to 10 hours of those. We need to go to school and work for 6 to 8 hours of that. And then we need to fit in sport. So how do we spend our time? You can think about it in terms of that clock and shading it. Okay, of the 8 hours, coloring the 8 hours for sleep, coloring the time that it takes to school, then chores. You'll also see that there is the big rocks analogy that we'll go through soon. That we can think really about time is finite and all of the other things that we need to do as well as screens need to fit in here. So they're just some examples, like you might pull out little bits and pieces and do little activities across a different bunch of weeks. The next part after you kind of have all these little chats and the talk is to establish an agreement. So actually to formalize in whatever way you choose to, some level of small and realistic agreements and actions in terms of those goal behaviors, not the stops or the don'ts, but the starts and the targets. Remember, parents have guidelines too. and being willing to improve your own habits, then embed that role modeling to kids and create that connection. So if you can step out of maybe your ego, or things like that and listen to your kids, that can be really interesting when you set a goal together. And my kid will often say, Mom, what are you doing on your phone? Is that work? How important is it? And she has my permission to do it. Sometimes I'm like, leave me alone. You're not the boss of me. And she's like, and so we have that agreement. That did not happen in one conversation. That has happened over nearly 9 years. Or, she's been talking since she was like 18 months old. So for a long time. Create a poster or a visual to remind everyone. So it probably needs to be documented. It probably needs to be around somewhere so you can be reminded that it exists. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be a Canva posh, thing that's like, you're going to share on Instagram. It can just be a crappy piece of paper that says stuff. Provide a settling in period. So you're going to need to kind of have a grandfather clause here. It's going to be hard to remember to change. We need to talk about what's realistic and reasonable with some reminders and scaffolding. Sometimes kids will need time to flag this with their friends. Like if you're having rules around what time you're going to be offline, they might need to say to their friends, like, hey, I've got new rules in my family. I'm not allowed to text after. And again, not allowed. I'm choosing not to be available for texting after 10 p.m. Can everyone be okay with that? Often what we do with friendship groups is set those packs within the friendship group as well, because what's going to benefit your kid is often going to benefit the other kids. So that's another kind of piece to the puzzle, is when kids create their own packs together, especially to do with DMs, like you won't be kicked out of the friendship group if you're not available between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. or something like that, like taking away that urgency of response, because many young people are actually peer supporting one another through their mental health challenges, which is kind of problematic, because unless they happen to have done a psychology or counseling degree by the time they're a teenager, it can be a lot of pressure on each other to provide that support. And they just basically need to know when to reach out to a trusted adult. Again, here's some ways that you can think about this, what we agree on as a whole family, and then what we are agreeing on individually. And you can use these pages from the playbook, or you can make up your own, however you like. You could do it across devices as well. There's a page that actually maps all the devices. The devices and platforms. So you might actually create an audit of all the different social media or messaging platforms. And also don't forget to include AI and chatbots. The use of young people using chatbots is phenomenal, and the way that they're using it and the context that they're using it for mental health support is another really interesting thing to kind of go on from the friendship stuff. Because kids are using companion chatbots, that companion is not going to, there's no friction in that friendship, in that relationship. A chatbot is going to agree and want it to like you. And there's not going to be any of the bumps in the road in that friendship, inverted commas, that you might have with a real person. So you're not actually having the ups and downs of friendship when you just have something that's going to agree with you and say, oh yeah, that sounds really hard. So having explicit conversations about chatbots might be required. And then you're going to do it all again. Revisit, review, and refine. Agree on a time to meet again. It doesn't have to be the massive thing. Review what worked and what didn't. Why it worked and what got in the way of success. Refine the agreement, come up with better and more practical solution. Remember, consistency is the tricky bit. If you don't follow up, the rest of it might have become a waste of time. So keep reviewing and don't give up, right? It's all a learning opportunity to keep trying and trying again. Even when you forget to try, it's 4 months, you haven't had the conversation. Okay, guess what? We need to pick that up again. We need to circle back, as we might say in corporate land. And some examples there, what we're tweaking to change our plan. What can we do if we're having trouble sticking to the plan? Often it's about support, like we didn't have enough support to put it in place. How can we get better at sticking to the plan? Again, this is about help seeking. This is a key thing that we want young people to make sure they're doing, is asking for help when things get tricky from somebody with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, not a robot and not another 12-year-old. Okay. So help seeking behavior is kind of embedded into this. And then what we re-agree on. And again, this is teaching young people that we need to revise and review and keep going and keep, plug away at things. It's not, oh, I did that, it was easy, moving on. All right, that was the process. There's a lot in there. And at that point, I would encourage you to really go through the workbook and see all the different bits and bobs. See, what bits do you like? What bits do you think would be really fun to do? What parts aren't really your vibe? Okay. Maybe there's whole things that I've left out that you want to email me and say, hey, we created this. You should add it in. I'm actually going to create a bit of a resource, like a collaborative resource where everyone can share different bits and pieces that they've kind of discovered and send it through. So we're going to talk now about technology taming tactics to try out. Okay. So these are just kind of some broad brushstrokes of things that I think are valuable for you to consider if you've, are already across a lot of the digital hacks, if you've done other courses with me or, whatever, maybe you don't need this bit, but here's some ones that I think are useful. To co-pilot, co-view, co-play, and then have conversations together. So one of the dangers around screen-based media use is that we all go down our own rabbit holes and forget to connect. It's not like having one TV in the lounge room where we all have to watch the same show and we all have, me, I talk all the way through shows, but we have that same storyline. We're going through, we're consuming our own digital diets, and then we're not talking even about what did you do on the internet today? Not just what did you do at school today, but what did you do on the internet today? So we're not connecting over some of those things. Having shared activities in open and communal spaces helps keep communication and connection open. And again, doing your homework in an open space, depending on what's accessible for you and the setup of your family and your house, we can have different contexts around where we use technology at different times, but that co-piloting, co-viewing and co-playing, and then the conversations that come out of that are really valuable. I sort of jokingly say that a parent who is too busy to play a video game with their child for 20 minutes probably needs to play for an hour. It's kind of riffing off that saying about if you're too busy to meditate for 20 minutes, you need to meditate for an hour. So really thinking about how your own kind of busyness and things like that might be getting in the way of the connection and the relationship with your people. And I recognize that is absolutely challenging. For parents who are parenting solo, who are running businesses, who might have their own disabilities or mental health challenges, who might be parenting, looking after older parents. So many of us are in the sandwich generation where we have older parents with aging needs as well as teenagers. So I just want to recognize it's not always that simple. And we'll talk a little bit about how you need to look after you as well. So a screen's place is really in the gaps, and we need to do the big rocks first. This is a really, really important conversation to have with kids. I think it's really helpful for time management in general. And if many of you would have heard, the whole idea is, you do the big rocks first. So the big rocks are sleep and attending school or engaging in education in some way. These are not negotiable for many people. Like for me in our house, you go to school and we get to bed on time. They're the things that we absolutely protect, sleep and school. So they're the big rocks we put into the jar first. The pebbles are things like sport and movement, homework, our chores, community activities, extracurricular activities, responsibilities, all those other things are the pebbles that go in next. And then the sand is the screen use, other leisure activities. It fits in the gaps when the rest is done. If we were to put the sand in first, the big rocks do not fit. If the big rocks are not done, our well-being is at stake, okay? and I will bang on about how important sleep is shortly. It's the thing that I start with correcting when anyone, for any reason, pretty much comes in to see me. I want to know how he's sleeping, right? Because if your sleep is off, your mood is going to be off. There's a whole cascade of other effects that happen when our sleep is not working. So the big rocks first analogy is probably the most important thing that everyone of every age can understand. We need to protect sleep. So as I said, one of my not negotiables, it's such a crucial neurobiological process for mood, metabolism, and memory. And I'm going to give you some hacks on that. There'll be links to a lot of resources about sleep in the handout. Another thing, again, depending on the age of your kids, is to teach an understanding of neurobiology. So when people understand more about how their mind or body works, they can actually make better choices and actions. So I've tested this across a lot of the presentations and the work that I've done with young people. I've done work around sleep, for instance, where we literally taught kids why their body needs sleep and the processes of lymphatic drainage that happens. Basically, as you're sleeping, your brain washes out the exhaust fumes from thinking, right? All of your thoughts kind of have little waste products, and those waste products are washed away through a process called lymphatic drainage when you sleep. If you have not slept enough, you've not done enough tidying up, you're starting the day with dirt in your brain, right? Exhaust and waste products in your brain. And they can actually add up over your lifetime and create amyl plaques, which then might lead to dementia. So the more kids understand that, the more they're likely then to buy into changing their habits, right? I was at a cafe yesterday and the girl asked me whether I wanted skinny milk. And I said, no, like skim milk is actually lower in fat, but higher in sugar. And the kid was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it was like a total scam in the 90s where everyone thought that eating low fat stuff was going to make them skinnier. But actually, there's more sugar in that. And it's the sugar that turns to stored fat if you have too much of it. And he was like, oh man, I never knew that. I'm not going to have a skinny latte anymore. So simple bits of information can be really helpful to behavior change. So this could be about food, risk-taking, sleep, their attention, their time. You don't have to be a neuroscientist to actually explain this because guess what? Technology is going to help you. YouTube has lots of great explainer videos. So when we, get stuck with trying to explain to them, and we do often want to explain and talk our way, lecture our way through helping them understand. Sometimes handing it over to a quality YouTube video by a trusted source, even though you're saying almost exactly the same thing as the YouTube person, kids listen differently. And I jokingly often say, kids will listen differently to somebody saying exactly the same thing from somebody who did not give birth to them, right? It's just part of that wiring. We also might want to consider the cadence of activity or the pace of activities. You will notice that modern TV shows are very fast paced and lots happens in a short time. There is more stuff that happens in one episode of Paw Patrol than happened in, which is a short show versus what happened in like half an hour of She-Ra or the Smurfs in the 80s, right? Everything's happening at a really fast pace. There's a lot of dramatic tension points. There's a formula in order to get us to pay attention. There's a lot of lights and, bedazzling of our brains on games that often mimic poker machines. So huge amounts of sensory information, complex designs, colors, lights, flashing, sounds, reinforcers, notifications. They're working really hard to keep our attention. And this is linked often to more and cheap dopamine responses. Okay. I'm not going to go deeply into dopamine. It's a really complex neuro transmitter with lots of different pathways. You naturally squirt dopamine out of your brain just from standing up, just across the course of the day. But we know that there are aspects of technology that then kind of add to this dopamine release. And this is what then sets the bar for what our brain goes seeking. So you might want to actually include the kinds of activities that you can watch at different times of the day, because that fast-paced activity just before bed is not a lullaby, right? A lullaby has a really different cadence. The sleepy time stories have a really different cadence to watching different shows at different times of the day. So it might get as granular as noticing what are the rev up activities, what are the calm down activities, and making sure they're done at particular times. Because we want to bookend the day well. How you start and end the day really matters. It matters from the perspective of falling asleep and getting good quality sleep. It matters from the perspective of waking up when cortisol naturally rises, and sometimes spiking your cortisol by checking social media first thing in the morning and all the notifications and the news and all of that kind of blazing information into your brain. So we want to keep certain screen functions away from the wind down and wake up zones. And this is where the digital sunset kicks in. Before school, screen use can actually chew through your cognitive load and dysregulate cognition. So our brains have limited processing power. We have limited ability to actually take on information. Hopefully by now in this presentation, even you've paused several different times to take a break because it's tons of information. And it's on purpose because I want to get you to get lots of value out of it, right? And you can stop and start and revisit and rewatch and fast forward and all those things. But our brain is sort of like a container, and it's a container with a filter. So as we pour information in, it filters down and we work out, do we need to keep that? Do we need to trash that? Do we forget it? Right? Literally forgetting memories. And if you've watched Inside Out, it goes through a lot of that with you. Okay. So the more information we pour into our brain before learning starts, the more difficult it might be to code information in and to learn when we get to school. And if we haven't had enough sleep and we're tired, our brain is definitely not going to learn if we haven't had enough sleep, especially chronically. So similarly at night, some screen activities switch us on rather than wind us down. So we want to think carefully about the kinds of activities that we're engaging in. A lot of people will say no screens in the bedroom. I break that rule myself because we have a old phone that is kind of locked down. It doesn't really do anything but play audiobooks and Spotify playlists. And she has a particular account. So her account's kids' accounts locked down on the main account. So it's really just for listening to stuff as you're going to sleep. It's on a timer. So you get half an hour of listening to whatever as you fall asleep. Okay. That is breaking a rule because there's a screen, even though it's locked down, in a bedroom. So you can think about, again, sensibly negotiating some of those broadly broadcast rules that you might hear sprouted so that they are appropriate for what you need. Nature does not like a vacuum. Okay, if we take something away, something rushes in to fill the gap. So you pull out a plant, the weeds pop up and fill the gap. So if we take an app off a smartphone, if we ban kids from 10 social media platforms, they don't necessarily decrease their screen time. When I took Instagram off my phone, I suddenly was very, very interested in my bank balances, or I was on Pinterest, or I was on Google News being fed more information because my brain is a dopamine seeking system. So we have to be really careful of thinking that we're taking something away and that being better. Because what we need to do is make sure that what we fill that vacuum with and we fill the gaps with is better, more aligned. So taking something away, the good alternative won't naturally spring into its place. We have to plant it. This is why we need to do some planning or some planting and think about alternative activities. What are we providing both online and off? Okay. We don't want kids to be on screens. We want kids to, be playing cricket and, riding their bikes, all of these things. Cool. Where are they going to do that? Are there actually facilities in our local communities that kids can do that? Are we taking them and booking the time at the trampoline park or the art and craft centre? Or are we willing to have the art and craft centre in our houses, which, is far more messy and, inconvenient to some degree than kids, doing nice things on the internet? And again, we can think about, are we actually trying to just reduce screen time, or are we trying to move their digital diet into things like my kid has some amazing drawing skills. It is not genetic because I am not very good at drawing. It's purely because of a program that teaches you very clearly and age appropriately how to draw on an iPad. Okay. Again, an iPad that is locked down that doesn't have like access to some of the gross parts. So we need to plan and provide those alternatives. We can't just take something away and hope for the best, hope that the good thing will rush in. Because kids often get bored. And we'll talk about boredom. We want to build that healthy menu of activities. And again, in the resource, the Healthy Mind Platter is going to help you build a range of options across domains like time to be social, to move, some downtime, like actually do nothing time. Sometimes we overlook that. Focus time or learning time, reflection time. So that will take you through, and you can build a menu of movement time. Again, summer, you might be going to the local pool, you might be swimming laps, you might be doing a whole range of things there. Winter, that activity might really change. Okay, if it's raining, what are we going to do? Oh, we are going to go the trampoline thing, right? So we want to have a menu of different things that we can choose from based on where we're at, what the day's like, and then build it out across those domains. So the Healthy Mind Platter is the resource for that. We can maybe consider a digital foyer. Lots of people tell me that they have, charging stations and that everything's docked in one place. Creating that space that devices become tethered to. So it's quite counterintuitive. Taking away the mobileness helps them nudge behavior towards a goal. Right? So often I work and my phone is in a different room so that it's out of sight, out of mind. So you might create some systems around where phones are, where technology lives in your house, and creating that special space that it lives in, just like in the 90s when the computer had its own special room. Another one to consider, and I'm experiencing this myself, is eye strain and technique. Okay, I should have gotten new glasses probably a year ago, and I have been squinting and squishing my way through the last few months to the degree my osteo is making a lot of money out of my weekly visits. Worth every cent, should I say. But we want to make sure that we are really focused on our eye health and our posture, and that we're teaching kids to worry and to be conscious of it, not to worry, to be conscious of it. So this idea of the 20-20 principle, every 20 minutes of looking at screens, do something, look at something 20 feet away and for 20 seconds and blink 20 times. Okay, so lubricating the eye, getting that long distance vision, not always being staring at something so close to us, making sure that our shoulders are back, can chuck in some reps of an exercise, and really kind of noticing the impacts of too much screen on our physical posture. That's a huge one. I don't care if this is 50, 50, 50 or 120, 120, 120, right? Just bring some awareness to the eyes and to the posture. Thinking about ideal learning spaces as well. And this is where tech use can get really tricky, because many young people need their laptops for their homework, and that laptop also goes into all these fun spaces. So how do we set up learning spaces? Beds are for sleeping, not studying. Okay, so really where it's accessible and available for you, and depending on your house, your configuration, your kids, your co-parenting arrangements, all of those things. We don't want to confuse the cues of a bed is for sleep and the cue of a bed is for study. Couches are for lounging. Having a good environment to study is really important, and changing spots maybe for online and offline activities can help adjust to different modes of learning. So a lot of schools are moving back to handwritten assignments. They're moving away from embedding digital technologies to digital technologies being that thing that's wheeled in and that you use for certain amounts of time. So we're seeing huge changes around that. But if we're asking kids to learn in general, we need to create spaces that are conducive for that. There's also the power of role modeling and having that real talk around what your tech habits are like. Some of the surveying that I've done lately of parents, 60% of parents are like, it's okay, but I know I need stronger boundaries. Okay. 20% of people are like, I need a massive intervention. It's out of control. right? So you can have a think about where you fit into that. And my tip here is to narrate what you're doing. If you get up and go to check your phone, that you say, hey, I'm just going to go and move some money onto the credit card because we're about to go and buy the roof racks for the holiday. I need to go and check when the next PNC meeting is and do X, Y, and Z. Kids then get used to the idea that, oh, we're not just playing Candy Crush. We're not just, having fun. Like their screen use is often that they understand I'm running a business, right? I'm juggling a lot of things, and without my phone, it would be a lot harder. It also keeps you on track because if you do go to your phone and you're just going to check the weather to know, how blazing hot it's going to be, and then you get distracted and do everything but check the weather, you can be held accountable. Okay. And you have that again, that shoulder to shoulder agreement of like we are allowed to gently, politely call one another in. Also want to think about selecting digitally nutritious games that are age appropriate. They have diverse gameplay and design, that they're pro-social and educational. So my tips here is the Taming Gaming Database and Games for Change. Two really great sites if you're looking to diversify that digital diet around different games and moving beyond spaces like Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite, which are kind of like the digital hot chips of the gaming world. And again, Roblox itself is not one game, it's 4 million games, millions and millions of games. It kind of like walking into Dime Zone, there's lots of different things to play. That's what Roblox is like. If you're not using the correct parental controls within Roblox, you're not milking all of the design features possible within these platforms, I really suggest that you go and have a think about and learn and upskill. Again, simple Google searches. I don't include a lot of those links because it changes so quickly. It would become obsolete so fast if I tried to teach you how to do all of this. A quick Google search, going to the platform and working out how to do this is absolutely time well spent. I would say it should be mandatory, right? If you're giving your kid access to something, you need to spend some time to make sure you're putting into place the available security settings because they are there. Lots of people are very critical of these platforms. They're not using some of the tools that are available to them. We still need to, even with all that switched on, do our due diligence again and again and again. So when they ask for that new app, that new game, they're desperate to get. Everyone has it. I must have it. Get them to do the research. And again, another resource for you. It's a little bit nerdy. Teach them to do their own background checks and discover more about what they're consuming and they're downloading. So that will be linked in the resource. It takes the pressure off you. And again, it sets up that sort of opportunity to discuss what they've discovered about the platform and then for you to decide whether or not you actually want to implement it and allow them to have it. Little deep breath as I keep going. Section 5 is all about some micro skills for the parenting conversations that you're going to be having. We want to help, we want to use scripts to help build our confidence in conversations. Using what I call gentle startups, or I think it actually comes from Gottman therapy, gentle startups to avoid defensiveness or shutdowns and withdrawals. So like I modeled before with the CPR kind of example, we can use Petria King's model of I notice, I imagine, I feel. Okay. So I notice that getting off games is becoming more difficult for you. And I imagine that you're really, really excited and interested in playing this game, and I can see you're really dedicated. But I feel like sometimes the aggressive behavior I receive is unacceptable. Okay, so we need to talk about it. You're naming the pattern, you're taking their perspective and trying to understand with curiosity where they're coming from, and then providing a reframe or a perspective on what you're experiencing and how it needs to change. Again, aligning this to values is really important. It's just not what we do. We want to be curious, not furious. And again, people have probably heard me say this a million times. I don't know who originally said it. If it was you, please let me know and I will credit you. But choosing connection and curiosity over correction and control super winning strategy. Okay. It might be that you need to fake it till you make it. You need to take a deep breath. You need to bottle all that and say, okay, like, tell me more. I'm really curious to understand more about what informed that choice or how you got to that perspective or that opinion or whatever. Pausing before reacting and reframing questions to ask in a more exploratory way, super handy. Trying to unpack what the young people are, thinking, their reasoning behind it, right? It's often like the output is blah, but their reasoning you can kind of go with and you can understand how they got there. So the more we understand the thinking behind the behavior, the more then we can reshape it with that curiosity rather than, leading with the furious, which then leads to the reactivity. I want to make a note on trust here too, because often kids feel like we don't trust them when it comes to their tech use, right? I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to have this happen, blah, blah, blah. And we can make a really important distinction here that we can trust their intention. I trust that they want to be a good kid. I trust that they really want to reach their goals. But we can't trust their brain, underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, versus billion-dollar technology corporations whose job it is to hijack their attention. So we can trust them, we can trust their intentions, but we do not trust their little brains, their little plastic underdeveloped brains versus the billions of dollars that they make and that they've, the huge investment that they're making on pervasive design, infinite scroll, all of those things that we know are problems. So you can reframe that with your kids to make sure that bridge to trust is there, but that we're not kidding ourselves that teenagers can just switch on these skills of, self-control, self-discipline, self-regulation. Okay. So you can maybe use that to, if they're feeling like you don't trust me, you're treating me like a baby, all that kind of stuff. We also need to bite back on boredom. So boredom can feel like an allergy for kids. We don't want to idolize boredom, right? A lot of people are like, oh, let them be bored. I'm like, well, when we let kids be bored, sometimes they become juvenile delinquents. They get into trouble. They get into mischief. We actually need to positively scaffold so that they can direct their energy and attention in an appropriate way. So we need to give them structure beyond those devices. It's actually, boredom is often just that dopamine depletion and the lack of stimulus. So if you've had stimulus, you go away from that dopamine then starts to peter out and you're used to high levels of it. It's actually just that kind of withdrawal. So how do we build tolerance for other activities that might be less intense, that lower cadence, and positively scaffold activities so that they don't get into mischief? Okay. So again, depending on your kids, their ages, their risk appetite. We often talk about teenage boys and their risk appetite, but the girls also go seeking some of that novelty. They go seeking that kind of high feeling, right? And I don't mean drug high, I just mean the good feeling of a dopamine reward pathway being activated. And again, it plays into those 3 C's of competence, connection, and control. So rethink boredom. We want to reframe FOMO as well. So fear of missing out is actually just a really negative way of framing our deeply innate need for belonging and our desire to be a part of something. So by making people feel weird for wanting to be a part of something, we can be sending the wrong message that it's like, not good to be wanting to be included, which is absolutely the opposite of our neurobiology. The issue is that we can't keep up with and be a part of everything that's happening all at once. So we can support teens by clarifying what matters and what things they do want to choose to be a part of. Okay, when there's so many choices, that theory of choice, when there's so many things to choose from, it's really hard. When you have less things to choose from, less ice cream choices, it's easier to choose what you want. So because there's such a huge menu of like people and things and what's going on, how do I be a part of everything? We sometimes can't be a part of everything. But reframing FOMO from a fear of missing out to actually acknowledging the deep need for belonging, also known as connection, which is part of those 3 C's. There are different strokes for different folks. Now, whether this is between families, your kids' um, friends' families, whether it's co-parenting or parallel parenting, if you're in that kind of context, there's different approaches, and these different approaches are going to add additional layers to the complexity of what you need to then come up with and negotiate and communicate and all of those things, right? So, kids are often like, oh, but Timmy's allowed to stay on Fortnite till 3 a.m. When we have a conversation with Timmy's parents, they're like, no, he's not. We're often a little bit shy to have these conversations with other families. And I just really encourage people to take that communication, that soft startup communication and curiosity to just explore the situation and ask some curious questions around what's happening in different households. Again, depending on the situation and your safety, if you have a really strained and difficult relationship with an ex, you and you're parallel parenting, you're not even trying to co-parent, but you're just doing your own things, you might be leaving that conversation, except in really particular examples where safety is being breached. So there are so many different ways to doing this, but I think the tools here that we can go back to are communication and being curious. There's also the sibling and individual differences. These are age-old issues that not only do kids use technology differently, but we have different experiences of parenting at different ages. So siblings are often in conflict over these perceived unfairnesses of different ages and birth order. So, the older one always says, oh, you got it before me. And the younger one says it's not fair, they get to do that. And that's why in this kind of plan, you have overarching rules for everyone and then those individual rules. Okay. And the consistency around those and how that's applied is going to be important there. We also just want to appreciate and accept the differences between people. Like individual differences are kind of the diversity that makes the world go round. And they're part of ongoing conversations as kids, get older and they, get their phone or are eligible for social media or whatever it might be. And then there's keeping your cool, because we are often maxed out, we're tired, we're running on empty, we're overwhelmed, and we're on a short fuse. So sometimes we might be leaning on technology a bit too much, either for our own use and our own self-regulation or to do some of the messy work of parenting too. Having a regulated nervous system is absolutely a luxury, and there's lots of ways that we can get there. This is not about mani-pedis and self-care and all of those sort of individualistic things. A lot of why we're here is, that the structures in society aren't necessarily supporting us to take a village and raising that kid. So that's, I guess I just want to recognize part of a much bigger conversation that, as I said, screen time falls disproportionately to women to manage. We can talk about that maybe another time. Here are some frequently asked questions just to finish up with. What do you do if the child is reluctant during implementation? Mainly the younger child, as an older sibling, has a different limit, right? So as I said, age-old problem. We're going to explain developmentally why there are differences. So understanding that neurobiology, and explain the role of you as a parent to protect and support their well-being. So sometimes life isn't fair, right? You might have seen that meme about, in the 80s, our parents told us that life wasn't fair, and that was the end of the TED Talk. We don't need to give a TED Talk about this. We can just say our brains are really different. My job is to protect your brain. I'm not doing my job as a parent if I'm not protecting your brain, right? My kid has heard this so many times. She's like, I can feel this is not good for my brain. I'm turning it off, okay? You do kind of need to be a parrot, and it, again, doesn't take that one conversation, but the more they understand about why somebody else gets it differently is mostly to do with their brains. When their brain's there, they get that too. Is there anything extra on positive and negative consequences, and how to implement those? I think, mainly there's natural consequences you can rely on, and then there's imposed consequences. We really need to identify what their pain point is. And again, that might not be quite the right language, but what is the thing that's actually going to motivate their behavior? What is the thing that moves the needle? Okay. We still want to keep in line with those practice things. So we don't want to like use a pain point around you will not get to go and do the state level sport that you're really good at. That doesn't make sense as a consequence. But actually finding something that matters to them and to discuss this and how you'd feel if it wasn't available or wasn't an option. It might be something that you stop doing. So you might stop being the Uber driver to the parties where you're kind of waiting up until 10, 12 o'clock or whatever it might be in order to get them home. You might be saying, well, you won't be able to go to that party because I won't be there to bring you home. It really depends, and it's a very tricky one because it requires you to reflect a little bit on your parenting style and your capacity to implement those consequences. Okay, so it is super complex, but I would ask the young person what they think a consequence for, some hypotheticals would be. What are some of the things that you could have up your sleeve should you need them, hoping that you don't actually need them? What can you do if kids refuse to negotiate tech use? I jokingly say stop paying the internet bill, but you will need to try and implement change without their collaboration. But that's still about sharing values and expectations. So sometimes if they don't want to play ball, you say, okay, well, if you're not willing to collaborate, I will create something that I think is reasonable in line with our values and expectations, and that will be implemented. And then there will be consequences for that. Okay. There is a kind of counseling intervention called motivational interviewing. And that is really about getting people to the stage of change where they're ready to consider it. And that might be that you use some, like, you don't go straight to the agreement. You do a whole bunch of why sleep's important, what's at risk if you don't study, how, there's many pubs up the mountain if you don't get your HSC or you don't, finish your 12, but what is the plan? So it might be that you just need to go slower with kids who are completely refusing. It would be interesting to examine why they're refusing. What is their resistance? Is it because they don't think it will work? They don't trust you to listen to them. They think everything's okay. And so you might need to actually show them in different ways some of those impacts. So going back to the I notice, I imagine, I feel, or the CPRs of the content, the pattern, CPR, the relationship, the cost to the relationship, and the solution. Okay. So just take it more slowly. And of course, I'm going to say, like, if you do get stuck, reach out to me. I can help you with these things. I work one-on-one with a lot of families to try and break through some of those kind of, stuck situations around resistance and around safety. And because I can, didn't give birth to your children, often when I say some of these things, they just listen differently. I've got different sneakers and my nose pierced, and they somehow listen differently. Whatever, as long as they're getting the message, it doesn't really matter who the messenger is my advice there. But it can be tricky, and there's going to be some kids who really are very stuck. So we need to adjust our approach. Are smartphones causing and social media causing mental health problems in teens? The short answer is no. The longer answer is it's very complicated, but the direct impact of social media is often overemphasized. There's no causation. There's a lot of correlation, and there's a lot of really shambolic research. Like the research is apples and oranges and kiwi fruits and, green apples with red apples and then oranges and mandarins. It's really hard to get replicable research where it actually looks beyond self-report measures of screen time. If you're asking a person to measure their screen time, We're terrible at measuring time. You ask a teenager, like, how long was that? They will not know. So a lot of the reports that are used in this research are self-report and they're not reliable. When we actually go to tech companies and say, hey, can you let us track time-based data in games? And they say yes, and let us have that data. We then need to say, hey, we did this research in partnership with this gaming company. And then people who want to criticize the research say, this was paid for by gaming companies, which is sometimes not true, but you declare an interest and say, yes, we worked with this gaming company, and therefore you have fudged your results. So there is a lot of within the academic community, there is a lot of debate about this causation and the problems, and whether it's the phone itself or social media, or in fact some of the particular ways of using social media that show up, and what are the particular so with the mental health problem, is it anxiety related to body image? Is it anxiety related to extremist content? Is it depression caused by cyberbullying? There are a lot of questions about what mental health like what mental health means, what are the measures of that, and then what are the drivers of that. How much is watching a live stream war and genocide over a long period of time impacting young people, their awareness of the climate crisis? Is this actually driving that? It's the content being consumed through those platforms. So there are many big, complicated questions. And number one thing that we want to do is protect young people and their brain and their mental health. So we need to take appropriate action to do that, not knee-jerk reaction that maybe does more harm than good for a group of people. So that's when I get quite a lot. You will be able to, if you have more questions, and I hope that you do have more questions, join a monthly Ask Me Anything coaching session that I run. All of the links and information is in your booklet so that you can jump on and share those questions or email me your questions. And I sometimes send voice memos to people to explain what's going on. This has brought us to the very long conclusion of the session. Thank you for sticking around if you've gotten this far. If you've gotten this far, write rainbow in the chat. Leave a comment saying rainbow, because then I'll know you got to the end. That would be really cool. And I might send you like a special little prize or a gift or something. Let me know how it goes. Always email, stay in touch. When you have purchased this, you will get an occasional email checking in saying, how did it go? What road humps did you hit? What's working beautifully? What did you learn? I love to hear from people. It's really helpful to improving my work. As you can see, there's been lots of questions over the years that I've sort of put together into the main ones that I've received. So I do really love hearing about how this is helping, maybe even hindering. Let me know your parenting with technology experience. All the very best of luck. Go well and go with curiosity. Thank you.